Anything Ghost, number 296. Welcome to Anything Ghost. My name is Lex Wall. Anything Ghost is a place where people share their personal paranormal experiences or local ghost legends, and I share them with you on the show. If you have a ghost story you want to share, a true ghost story, or a local ghost legend, send them to lex@anythingghost.com. Got a lot of creepy stuff coming up for you in show number 296, so stick around for show number 296. Okay, the first story we have is from Nate in Alabama. Ghosts of Alabama. When I was around 10, my parents and I moved from big city Tennessee to very rural Alabama. I was very upset about the move, so my parents let me help pick the house. I picked a beautiful 2-story house in a neighborhood lined with huge old Victorian houses. It had been built in the 1950s, so it wasn't that old. But right when we moved in, all 3 of us had eerie feelings in the house, like someone was constantly watching us. The first 2 weeks in the house were very unsettling. We heard doors slam upstairs and shuffling sounds, as well as the sound of boxes being dragged across the floor. About a year later, my brother, wife, and nephew moved in with us. Right off the bat, my nephew started experiencing things. He always said, "Miss Cole won't stop bothering me." We had no idea who Miss Cole was. So after a few incidents with my nephew, my dad started to do research on the house. He found out that the house had been built by the Cole family, and Miss Cole was one of the 3 people who had passed away in the house. They all died on the 2nd story in the room we kept hearing all the sounds in. The Haunted Lyle House, Chattanooga, Tennessee. In 1978, Mrs. John T. Lyle owned an old home that had been built in 1860. When first entering through the front door of the old house, the visitor would be greeted by a hallway with a set of stairs. On many occasions, Mrs. Lyle and guests would hear the front door open and then hear footsteps head up those stairs and into the bedroom that was just above the kitchen. Each time she went to see who had come into her home, she would find nobody. But one afternoon, Mrs. Lyle was walking into the living room from the dining room and saw a man wearing a smoking jacket sitting in a wicker rocking chair in the living room. The ghost disappeared just as quickly as it had appeared, and it even frightened her dog, who made a dash for the kitchen after seeing the ghost. There was one evening when Mrs. Lyle was awakened in the early morning hours by the sounds of a party. She got out of bed, walked into the main hall, and announced that she was home now. The noises immediately stopped. She went back to bed, and no more sounds were heard. Often Mrs. Lyle would hear the sound of several voices talking softly, but she was unable to understand one word of what was being said. And here's a short but creepy story from Annie and Erin in North Carolina. Maxie's Ghost.
I'm Mary, and this is my story. I'm 6 years old, and when we were at a house in Virginia, all of a sudden, one morning, I heard a scratch at my bedroom window. At my bedroom door. And guess what happened when I opened it? Nothing was there. So then I was like, come on in, Maxie, and then I was lifting up the air. I'm not sure why. And so I and then I was petting the I don't know why too. And that's my story.
A Step Back in Time. Anything Ghost, episode 101. Halloween of 2009.
Hello, Lex. This is Marcelle from Los Angeles. I just want to say that I love the podcast and I'm really excited to be submitting my first story. So the events that I'm going to talk about today happened when I was about 13. I was living with, my parents are divorced and my brother and I spent half of our time with our mom and half of our time with our dad. And when we were about 13, she remarried and was pregnant with twins. So we moved in with her and my new stepdad into a rented house in Simi Valley, which is where I lived at the time. This was also a couple of months after the Northridge earthquake, which is kind of important for the story later on. I had experienced the earthquake very close to the epicenter and was kind of traumatized by it. So some of the events pertain to that. Anyway, we had moved in to this house, and it was my stepdad, who we had known for a long time, my mom, my brother, and I, and my stepdad's mother at first. And everything seemed fine for a while. My brother and I always had a kind of uncomfortable feeling in the house. We were not really sure why that was, but we actually preferred to play outside or in the garage because if we were in the house, we always felt like someone was watching us. And it was particularly bad when my stepfather's mother was living there. And she was a nice person before we moved into that house, and it seemed like something really snapped inside of her when we lived there. And we would be gone, my brother and I would be gone spending time at my dad's house, and my step-grandmother was always accusing us of moving things and hiding things. And she ended up fighting with my mom quite a bit because of this. And my mom would say, it's impossible. The children couldn't have moved your slippers or your remote or whatever it was. They haven't been here. And she would just talk about how my mom was covering up for us and we were such bad children and blah, blah, blah. So it wasn't long before she eventually left. And that was the first sign that something strange was happening in the house. The layout of the house was kind of interesting. When you walked in the front door, to the left there was a hallway that went into the two front bedrooms and the master bedroom. And that hallway had its own door that separated it from the living room. The door was hung at one of those angles where it would close if it wasn't held open, so we had a brick that would hold the door open, and it had one of those like knitted brick covers on top of it. And one of the things we noticed was that we would come home, or during the middle of the day, someone would walk down the hallway to go to the bathroom, and when they would come out, the brick had been moved, and the door would have swung itself shut. And at first we thought someone was, playing tricks in the house, someone kept moving the brick, but no one ever would, or it would happen when you were alone in that part of the house and everybody else was outside, or it would happen when we'd left and come home and the brick was moved and the door was closed. So we always thought that was kind of strange. A couple things that happened to me personally by myself. One night I was in my room, I was reading a book, and I was sitting on my bed, and my bed started to shake, and I actually thought it was an aftershock from the earthquake. And I'm terrified of earthquakes, so I, of course, jumped up off my bed and ran out into the hallway, and, wide-eyed and wild, and asked my family, oh my gosh, did you just feel that huge aftershock? And they all looked at me like I was crazy, and they say, what are you talking about? There was no aftershock. And this was like a big shaking. It wasn't a little shake. And so that was a little bit disconcerting, and I wouldn't go back in my room alone the rest of the time. I still wanted to believe it was an earthquake in the back of my head, I think, even though I knew that it was kind of strange that only I felt that. And unbeknownst to me, my brother had experienced some similar things. We ended up talking about it several years after we moved out of the house, but while we were living there, there were a couple of nights when he woke up because his bed was shaking and he thought it was an earthquake, and the bed would stop shaking once he kind of started looking around, and no one else ever felt them. So that happened to both of us. After the twins were born, a couple of other weird things started happening. One of the nights my brother woke up from the bed shaking. He got frightened and he wanted to go talk to my mom, and he looked out his door, and our 2 bedrooms were next to each other, and across the hall was the master bedroom and the bathroom, which was attached to the hall and the master bedroom. And from my brother's doorway, he could look diagonal across the hall into my mother's bedroom, which is where the babies were sleeping. And he said that he woke up and was frightened, and he looked out the hall door and into her room, and he saw her standing over the baby's crib. And so he got up out of his bed and walked in there, and in the meantime, no one was in the room. The babies were in there sleeping soundly, and he thought, okay, well, she must have gone somewhere else. So he goes out looking for her, and he couldn't find her anywhere in the house. So then he starts to panic, and he went out into the backyard and found that she was out there smoking, reading a book. And he said, Mom, where did you go? Didn't you hear me calling for you? And she said, no, I've been out here for the last 15 minutes. What's going on? And he said, no, Mom, my bed shook, and I thought it was an earthquake, and I saw you in the baby's room, and there was no one there. And she says that she had been outside the entire time. A couple of other weird things happened. I had one of those lamps that if you touch any of the metal parts, it would turn on from low, medium, and high, and then turn back off again. And there were a couple times when I noticed the light settings were adjusting themselves on their own. I don't know if that was maybe an electrical malfunction, but it certainly freaked me out at the time. And there were other times when we could hear the sounds of what sounded like somebody walking on the roof. And once I was taking a bath and it happened, and my stepdad actually went outside and climbed on the roof. He thought it was the neighbor kid, and no one was up there. We didn't really have an attic space, so to speak, so I don't think it was an animal of any kind, but there's definitely some weird stuff going on in that house. That's just one of my experiences. I've had a lot more, and I plan to send them in, but I just wanted to do my first storytelling on Anything Ghost. Like I said, I love the podcast, and I can't wait to hear more. Happy Halloween!
Hey Lex, my name is Ashely, and if you can believe it, I have been listening to Anything Ghost since I had my iPod Classic in the 6th grade, and you had about 10 episodes back in 06, so just to let you know, you've got an OG listener here. And of course, I also have access to the Anything Ghost archives, so you know that I'm a real one. So I don't know what took me so long to finally send you my stories, but today is the day. So I have about 3 stories, and I'll start with the most tame, and then we can get into the deep water. So I wouldn't say that the house that I grew up in was haunted at all, by any means, but I have a solid belief that no matter where you live, that spirits can pass through. It might be due to my Caribbean upbringing, which was filled with, folk tales of horrifying things that is used as a tool to make sure kids behave themselves. But that's neither here nor there. But like many people who live in certain locations, spirits did pass through on more than one occasion. And one thing that I find in common with a lot of people who send in their stories is that there's a bit of mimicry going on with spirits replicating people who you live with. And only in retrospect do you realize that it was indeed not the person you thought it was. So the first story starts off, I made the tennis team, and I made my dad buy me a new racket so that I could have a really good season with it, etc., etc. So I'm thinking I'm such a hot shot. I'm coming up the stairs of my old New England house, and I'm, bouncing the tennis ball on the racket while I'm walking, which is a training trick that they teach you when you first learn tennis so you can start learning control. So I'm doing that all the way up the stairs with my new racket, and I want to go and show my mom and my aunt, who are both upstairs at the time. So I'm going up the stairs, feeling really cool. So I am balancing, going down the hallway, and the upstairs is kind of an L shape. At the base of the L is my room and the bathroom. In the middle of the L is my mom's room, and at the furthest end opposite of my room is my aunt's room. So I see her in her room, and she's like moving around and stuff, and I'm looking at the time, and it seems like she's supposed to be at Bible study, but I'm in high school. I'm thinking I'm the coolest thing since sliced bread, and I don't really care as long as whoever wants to listen to my nonsensical tale about how I got a new racket. So I'm going into my mom's room, and I'm like showing her this little trick, and she's like, "Oh, wow. Glad to hear you made the team, and glad to see you got your new racket. It looks great." And I'm just like, yeah, I'm going to go show Auntie Maggie. So my mom looks at me like, "Well, you're going to have to wait because she's away at Bible study and she's not home right now." And immediately I stopped the trick I was doing, and the ball falls off into the other side of the room dramatically. And I'm looking at her like, no, she must have missed the church fan because I just saw her in her room. And my mom was like, "No, I saw her leave, and I'm definitely the only one up here." So I look at my mom, and my eyes start to water because I'm just in pure shock. I definitely saw the figure of my aunt moving around in her room. In retrospect, it wasn't in color. It was just like a shadow of her moving around in the space, which, I wasn't really thinking about at the time, but I couldn't see her features. It was merely the outline of her going through the motions of, cleaning up or whatever this thing was doing. So I'm terrified because her room is not at all far from my mother's. And I know that in order to leave my mom's room, I have to go back into the hallway, and I have to make that decision of, am I gonna look over my shoulder and look in there, or am I just gonna book it back downstairs to where things are no longer weird? So of course I do the latter, and I say, "Cool, strange things are happening here, and it's time for me to go." And I just hop my happy butt back down the stairs, and I think it took me a couple days before I was able to look down that hallway with the same kind of bravado that I usually do. So that's story number 1. Story number 2 would be something very similar, but way, way, way more shocking to me, at least. And it's along the same lines as the first one. So at this point, I'm the youngest of 3 girls. I finally have my own room. My oldest sisters, one has already graduated college, and my middle sister is in college at the time. So I go to a school where there's uniforms, and some Fridays we're able to wear civilian clothes and just regular clothes. So I'm going through my drawers and not finding anything I like in particular. So of course my sister didn't bring all of her clothes back with her to college. So I sneak over to her room and I look through whatever little parcels that she has left behind for me to, kind of scavenge through, as little sisters do. And I'm looking through. I walk into her room, looking. And I think I pick up a shirt or two that I'm going to try on, see how I feel about it. Because, I wear a uniform every day, and to be able to wear jeans to school is like a big deal. So I want to make sure that I look, I look cute. But I turn around after digging through her closet, and I look on her bed, and there, clear as day, is the figure of my sister sleeping in her bed. And it's not transparent. It's not, a shadow like with my aunt. It looks exactly like if I were to reach out and touch this image, that it would really be her. And I'm so surprised that I just stare for a second or two. And honestly, the memory is so coated in shock, I can't remember if it fades away or I just leave the premises, as I like to do when things get weird. But it is so clear, the image of my sister just laying in her bed as if she were sleeping. And I remember thinking in the back of my head that A, I am 100% sure that this is not my sister. And B, if whatever the hell this is opens its eyes and actually looks at me, I might faint. So it's time to go. So I just left her room, and I think I actually closed the door because I'm like, yeah, I'm done with whatever is going on in here. And I just kind of walk back to my room, and I also close my door. And I'm just like, it takes me a moment to collect myself. And I can't remember if I told my mom what happened or what have you, but I can still see what my sister looked like lying there. It looked like exactly as if she were home. Her curls on the pillow, her eyes shut, her wearing like a random t-shirt to bed, and she looks like she's resting peacefully. But I'm not sure if it was that same kind of mimicry going on with whatever ghost or passing spirit likes to mess with me in the house, or if I was seeing something residual of just a strong presence or energy left behind by my sister, just from, living in the space for so many years. And then this brings us to my final experience, which is always hard for me to retell because it is so completely visceral and emotional that, it just brings tears to my eyes every time I even think about it. So I'm a total nerd, and I am away at space camp, and there's some kind of storm or something where coming back home isn't, a direct flight. And this is the first time I've flown anywhere by myself in order to attend this camp. So I'm in the airport and I'm feeling very small and very young that I'm going to have to figure out how to get home on my own. So I go talk to the flight attendant, and she says, well, we can't get you home tonight, but we can get you to these other locations. Do you have any relatives in any of these other areas? And it's a pretty long list, so, it's worth a shot. And I look, on the list, and thankfully my oldest sister, who's in Maryland at the time, can pick me up from one of the millions of airports that are in the DMV area. So I say, okay, well, I'm going to take this flight tonight, and can I also get a flight back to my home state afterwards? And of course the flight attendant works it out. What am I, like? I must have been in high school, so maybe like 14 at the time, flying by myself, not really knowing how to reroute myself. She helps me out, and I call my sister and say, hey, things aren't working out with the flight. Can I stay at your place tonight? And then can you take me to the airport the next day? She says, of course, we're happy to have you. And then she comes and picks me up and sets me up in one of her guest bedrooms in her house. Now, this house that she moved into is notorious for many horrifying experiences that she's relayed to our family over the years. But at this point, I had never experienced anything there. It was, a house bordering a deep forest. And you can see all kinds of beautiful woodland creatures passing through in the spring. They've got cherry blossoms. It's a beautiful scenic property. So to me at this point, it's still hard to connect those dots of saying, like, this is a scary place to be and not somewhere I want to be, So she sets me up in the rooms, and she's just moved there and hasn't gotten quite comfortable in the home for many reasons. So I'm on a blow-up bed on the floor. It's not one of those larger ones. It's like a little small blow-up bed. And honestly, at this point, I'm exhausted. I've been flying around trying to get anywhere that I can rest my head with a family member. And, and I'm just happy to be with family at that point. So as I'm getting ready for bed, I'm in the bathroom in the hallway, and my sister and her boyfriend at the time, now husband, we're all chatting, just reminiscing in the bathroom while I'm brushing my teeth. It's a large bathroom, so someone's sitting on this side, on that side, and I'm just like letting them know how things have been going at camp and stuff like that. So as we're talking, I get this feeling coming over me, and it feels like something is just sucking the energy right out of me. And I start to see dark spots in my vision, and I feel like I'm going to faint. So they're talking, and I just kind of feel like the room is tilting. So I walk over to the toilet, close the seat, and I just sit down just so I can catch my breath, because it feels like a slam of like a fainting spell. And I've never fainted in my life. Even though I like to talk about like, oh my God, I'm so scared I'm going to faint. I've never actually fainted. I'm just chronically dramatic. And I just kind of sit there, and I have to like practice breathing, and I'm breathing just to kind of catch myself. And I'm just like, my sister's like, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I'm just more tired than I realized, I guess. So I think I'm just gonna go to bed. Thanks for staying up and picking me up, but I think I'm gonna hit the sack and go to bed. She's obviously understanding. She's my big sister. She knows my moods, and when I'm just like, kind of just need to take a nap to feel better. And, so I go off to bed. So as I'm laying there, I realized that when I came in, that her boyfriend had been saging the entire top floor. And I'm starting to put some things together. I'm just like, ooh, maybe things aren't as good as I thought they were here in this like extremely scenic house. And maybe, weird things are happening here as well. So I don't think about it too long before I'm going to sleep and I'm knocked out. And of course, I wake up in the middle of the night. I am laying on the ground on that little blow-up bed, and I just wake up so suddenly that it just feels completely unnatural, that something is obviously very, very wrong. And I cannot explain it, but if it has happened to you, you know exactly what I'm talking about when I say I can feel something. Okay, so let's just do a quick layout right here. I'm in the guest bedroom, and which is on the upstairs of my sister's house, and her spot is, or her bedroom with her boyfriend is all the way on the other side of the hall. And as much as I can try to explain it, I'll try, but I can feel something coming down the hallway. And I've never experienced anything like this since, thankfully. Thank God. But it's like this energy is coming down the hall, and the closer it gets, the more I feel like that gut feeling gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And my palms are sweating, and my heart is like beating out of my chest. And I look over to the door, and because I know it's not there yet, but I know it's coming down the hall, and I'm like, should I get up and try to slam this door? Or do I even want it to know that I'm awake? But I just know, I can't even explain it. I just know it knows I'm there. I know it's coming down the hallway, and the closer this energy is coming towards me, the more and more I'm like completely petrified, terrified, knowing that something terrible is about to happen. So I assess the distance of the door, and I just take that the comforter that I'm under, and I just pull it up over my head, and I start praying. Like, I am trembling underneath the comforters, and I haven't even seen what is coming down the hallway. I've never experienced anything like this. I wouldn't say that I'm particularly sensitive or more sensitive than other people, but the fact that I could feel whatever this thing was coming down the hallway is like completely surreal. So it's coming down the hallway, and suddenly I know for a fact that it's in the room with me. And just to put it in perspective, it feels like, I don't know if it's of the feeling of a person. I can't even say what gender it is. I just know that it is something absolutely terrible that I don't want any gun smoke with whatsoever. So of course, it'd be one thing if I was laying in a normal mattress, but I'm on a blow-up bed on the ground, basically. So the closer it gets to me, if it were a person, like, I'd be pretty much at its ankles and at its mercy if it really was a person. So I'm laying there in bed, just trying to pretend that I'm sleeping and that nothing is wrong. And out of nowhere, this thing right next to my head, which is like pretty much on the ground because of this blow-up mattress, slams its fist or stomps its foot right next down to my head with a loud bang, as if to say, if you mess with me, that is going to be you, and I have no problem crushing your skull right now. After that happened, I think I may have actually fainted because I don't remember going to sleep. I just remember trying to stay as still as possible and, just trying to just be invisible. And somehow after that, I don't know how, I just go back to sleep. And when I wake up in the morning, I tell my sister and her boyfriend absolutely nothing. I get ready, and then I just leave. So that is probably one of the most terrifying things that has ever happened to me. And I pray that nothing surpasses it, and it keeps that number one spot. And that's just And that's just that. But that, I don't know what it was, but it just wanted to let me know that, hey, things are not right in this house. And if you think that you have the power to do anything about it, I have no problem breaking your bones. So those are my 3 stories. Hey, if any of you guys have ever experienced anything like the feeling that I had of just knowing something was coming in my last story, let me know. And Lex, of course, a big thank you to you again. That I love this platform that you've created, and it's so spooky. And I've always loved ghost stories and the occult more than I should, but I just wanted to say thank you for everyone putting in their stories over the years, and of course, take care.
If you'd like to hear the iPod classic years of Anything Ghost that Ashely alluded to at the beginning of her recording, well, you can. In fact, you can hear all those old episodes, the latest episodes, and every single one in between by joining the Anything Ghost VIP group. There's a one-time membership fee that will give you access to the complete Anything Ghost library. It makes a great Halloween gift. For more information, go to anythingghost.com and then go to the Join the VIP link. anythingghost.com. Join VIP. And up next is a great haunted house story that should get you ready for the Halloween season. From Matt in Durham, North Carolina, The Farmhouse on Houlton Road. I've been a fan of Anything Ghost for several years now, but I've hesitated about whether to contribute my family's story. I'm the only member of my immediate family who didn't personally experience anything inexplicable, as I was off at college in another town when most of these events occurred. I think it's too intriguing to go untold, though. My parents don't understand what a podcast is, and my younger sisters don't like discussing their time in the old farmhouse on Houlton Road, so that leaves me to share their story as best I can. In the fall of 2005, my parents were going through a nasty divorce. They each needed to save up for their own apartments, so they moved the family from the house where I grew up into a small mid-19th century farmhouse on the outskirts of my hometown. This was way up in northern Maine, about 6 hours north of Portland, 3 hours north of Bangor, only a 20-minute drive from the border with New Brunswick, Canada. It's sparsely populated, geographically isolated, and economically depressed. Just the kind of place you'd expect to be full of ghosts. The landscape. There is a patchwork of rolling potato fields and dense forests, but the best days of the potato and timber industries are long past. So the main roads are lined with disused farmhouses, either fixed up and rented out, or left to bow and crumble into rubble. The farmhouse my dad found had been converted into a duplex of 2 apartments that were mirror images of one another, divided by a central wall. An older lady who kept to herself had the rear apartment, by the fields. My family moved into the one nearest the road. What I remember most about the house was how cold it was, even by northern New England standards. That was likely due to the age of the place, and the merciless winds coming across the acres and acres of frozen fields, but maybe there was more to it. At any rate, I only lived there a few months, attending the tiny local university for 1 semester, before transferring to the state's flagship campus about 3 hours away. Most nights, I was out with friends, partying, trying to meet girls, and distracting myself from family problems, so I didn't spend a lot of time there. When I did, I slept downstairs, in the living room, or in a small alcove between it and the dining room. For whatever reason, the first floor seemed to be free of strange activity, or I was just gone too often to notice. She didn't talk about it at the time, because she didn't want to give my parents any more headaches that they already had, but my youngest sister, about 11 at that time, always felt unwelcome in her new bedroom. Hers was the last room at the end of the narrow upstairs hallway. She says the room had an eerie, oppressive feeling that seemed to thicken at night. At times, alone in her room, she felt as if someone was watching her or lingering in the room with her. Apparently, it was so palpable that some of her friends who would come over for slumber parties would refuse to stay over again, and those that came back did so on the condition that they slept downstairs on the living room floor. That sister never saw anything strange, but she insists there was something off about that back bedroom. She learned to tolerate it, but she was never at ease there. Over the course of that winter, the other 3 members of my family, my mom, my dad, and my other sister, who would have been about 15 at the time, each on separate occasions, claims that they had seen an apparition in the upstairs hallway. My sister saw it first. She was coming from or going to the bathroom in the middle of the night. She heard footsteps on the stairs. They led up from the living room and culminated across my parents' bedroom at the end of the hallway opposite my sister's rooms. She watched as a tall woman with dark hair in a light-colored dress emerged from the stairway. She slowly walked the length of the hallway and entered our youngest sister's room. The women in our family are barely over 5 feet tall, and none of them had black hair. My sister fled back to her bed, hid under the covers, and decided not to tell my parents about it. Again, she didn't want to burden them with any additional problems, and anyway, in the morning, she managed to convince herself that she was only half awake or sleepwalking or something. Not long after that, my mom got up in the middle of the night and saw a tall woman in white with long dark hair walking down the hallway. It was the dead of the winter, and the house was on Houlton Road, the main route heading toward I-95 and any semblance of civilization. Houses there are far and few between, so people drive way too fast through there, and the road is infamous for car accidents. In fact, a few years after moving out, my sister, who saw the apparition, hit black ice and rolled her car within a mile of that house, but luckily she was not injured. So my mom had assumed that the tall woman had perhaps crashed her car or gone off the side of the road and become stuck in the snow. She then wandered into the nearest house for help. She followed the figure down the hallway, trying to get its attention, but it kept walking. The figure then turned at the end of the hall and entered my youngest sister's bedroom. My mom's protective instinct kicked in. She ran in there and turned on the light. But there was only my sister, sound asleep in her bed. No one in the closet or under the bed. Nowhere else for someone that tall to hide. The room was on the 2nd story, and the only window was a sealed storm window, painted shut, probably unopened for years. She didn't see any footprints in the snow below either. She told my dad about it, but he dismissed it as yet more crazy talk from his soon-to-be ex-wife. She didn't say anything to my sisters until after they moved out, because, ironically, she didn't want to frighten them. Then toward the end of winter, my dad saw it too. Same basic scenario, except that he said, unlike my mom and sister, he didn't feel afraid. He was more confused and then amazed by what he was seeing. The other big difference was that he didn't watch it go into my sister's room. Instead, it ignored his attempts to speak to it. He'd also assumed it was the victim of a car crash, perhaps unresponsive due to a concussion or hypothermia. It continued walking down the hall, straight through the dividing wall. Each of them saw it only once. I didn't hear a word about it until years later. I don't think any of them like talking about it, but all 3 of them insist that they were wide awake and they know what they saw. It sounds to me like your textbook Residual Haunting, the comings and goings of someone who once lived in that location, stuck in some sort of loop, retracing the same path night after night. If that's the case, the physical rules of the house must remain consistent with her time there. In other words, given my dad's account, that dividing wall, which was only a few years old at the time, didn't seem to apply to her. I'll be honest, as fascinated as I am with ghosts and cryptids and the like, I don't buy into religion or spirituality in any way, and I've always wondered if it was some sort of psychological phenomenon that was brought on by the negativity and volatile environment during their time in that house. I've heard and read many times that paranormal events seem to coincide with periods of intense emotional turmoil, which that period certainly was for everyone in my family. It makes me wonder whether so many hauntings are in fact products of addled and exhausted minds trying to distract themselves from unpleasant realities. That said, it's difficult to dismiss all 4 of my family members' insistence that the house was haunted, and the idea of some mass delusion occurring on different nights for different people in the same place begins to sound more far-fetched than the idea that there really was something unexplainable happening. Who knows how many people lived and died in that house over the years? Maybe one of them couldn't leave or didn't want to. I guess we'll never know for sure, because a few years after my family moved out and went their separate ways, the house was burned to the ground. No one was living there at the time, but according to my family, that doesn't necessarily mean it was uninhabited. Halloween is very quickly approaching, so that means the Anything Ghost Mega Macabre Halloween special is on its way. So don't forget to send in your personal ghost story or a local ghost legend for the Anything Ghost Mega Macabre Halloween special for the year 2022. This will be the 15th, I believe. So send your story to lex@anythingghost.com, or there's a form on anythingghost.com, a contact form. Fill that out and send it to me that way. You can record it yourself. Try to make it a nice sounding recording though, and don't add any music and effects. Okay everybody, I'll talk to you in show number 297 of Anything Ghost. Until then, enjoy the upcoming Halloween season and take care.